Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Grung Week in Review for March 2, 2024. We're recording this on Tuesday, March 4, and my co-host Asbed Bedrossian won't be joining us today. His schedule is going to be spotty actually for the next few episodes we record, so he will join us when he's able to. And today we're joined by our guest, Hrant Mikaelian, to discuss some critical developments that took place over the last week. We'll be diving into the fallout of the Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to the White House and the resulting tensions in international relations. Then we'll shift gears to examine the recent presidential elections in Abkhazia and their implications. Finally, we'll cover the ever-complex Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, including the ongoing issue of Armenian POWs in Baku. All right, let's get started. Hello, Hrant, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Hovik Jan. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're always happy to have you. So, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the White House ended in a disaster of proportions that I don't recall seeing recently in diplomatic affairs. He had a heated clash with President Trump and Vice President Vance, essentially in front of the whole media. And initially, the visit was set to finalize a rare earths mineral deal. And the meeting spiraled into a tense debate over Ukraine's war strategy. Vance essentially was pushing Zelensky for negotiations with Russia, which Zelensky rejected publicly, prompting Trump to accuse him of, and I'm quoting, gambling with World War III. In fact, the fallout led to the cancellation of all planned events, and essentially Zelensky was kicked out of the White House and flew back to Europe, where he was received very warmly by European leaders in England. And there was some news today that Trump may be canceling military aid to Ukraine or stopping for now. I don't know if that's confirmed, but yeah. So what are your thoughts about this exchange that happened in the White House, Hrant?
So in reality, this meeting should not have happened. In the beginning, Trump has told Zelensky not to come because the meeting is not prepared. Zelensky decided to come. And the reason was he needed to bring this deal, this peace deal, the negotiations to fail. Why did he need it? Because Trump's policy leads to Zelensky losing power. And not only that, but also he might become a victim of politically heated discussions of post-war Ukraine. So Zelensky wants guarantees. Of course, he says he wants guarantees for Ukraine, but primarily, of course, he wants guarantees for himself. So he needed to put this negotiation round to the end. And not only he himself, but he also got the advice from UK and France. And it's not that Trump was very sincere. He wanted the peace, and Zelensky wanted to destroy the peace talk. On one hand, it looks like this. But on the other hand, of course, Zelensky has his own interest. Trump has his own interest. Trump clearly shows that he is going to ignore Zelensky and European leaders. So they needed to have a counter game. Not only them, but also the Democrats in the United States. So I think in this short episode, Zelensky won. And he brought Trump to anger. The deal has failed. And then the whole world media, well, at least let's say mainstream media, supported Zelensky. Then all European leaders have supported Zelensky, which seems to look like a prepared campaign. But the thing is, and here we are coming to the lessons for Armenian leaders, that this is a short-term win. Because, yes, of course, Trump has failed. Trump did not prepare for these talks. Trump wanted to have these talks publicly because it was designed to be a photo session. But then they started sharing ideas and gave the tribune to Zelensky, which he used to 100% efficiency. But in the end, Zelensky did not gain anything for Ukraine. So now Trump will be more angry. Yes, he's more vulnerable towards criticism, but he is more angry, and Ukraine will suffer. So ultimately, the lesson for Armenian leaders is not to get engaged in the geopolitical games, try to be wise, and try to think Long term, not short term. Short term, Zelensky won. Long term, he lost.
What does this mean for the EU? Why did they advise him to sabotage this meeting?
Well, because Trump clearly said that he has a peace agenda in Ukraine in order to shift the attention, United States attention towards the East, be it Middle East or the Far East. So basically, he's going to ignore the EU and put the whole responsibility for Ukraine peace ultimately on the EU. So what he is saying is that he will gain as a result of these peace talks. So he is the peace bringer, let's say, but the responsibility will be on European shoulders. So they didn't want him to succeed in this because clearly they are turning out to be losers and he's going to be a winner. So they tried to use Zelensky as a tool for their counter game to save themselves as well. It's also a lesson for Trump. Be prepared. And of course, lessons for Armenian leaders. Be prepared and take into consideration, at least think about interests of other players on the negotiation and around the negotiation.
Okay, last thing about this Trump meeting. During that discussion, the presser, Trump said something that wasn't caught by many. He said, and I'm quoting, "Right now there's a nation thinking about going to war on something nobody in this room has ever heard about. Two smaller nations, but big, still big. And I think I've stopped it." A lot of people speculated that it may be related to our region. I'm wondering if there's any way to analyze this in more detail or what your thoughts are about what he said. Are you aware of that statement by Trump?
To be frank, I have missed it. Technically, it could be referred to our conflict because Trump administration and some of its representatives have cited or referred to Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. It also could be about Israel and Azerbaijan, and Arabs, and some other conflicts. But to be frank, I have not anything more to say.
So let's go to Abkhazia. On March 1st, Abkhazia held the second round of its presidential elections, which were prompted by mass protests in November. The unrest erupted in response to a controversial law in November that would allow Russians to purchase property in the republic. That led to the protests and ultimately to the resignation of the president at the time, Aslan Bjania. His vice president, Badra Gunba, assumed the interim leadership. So in the runoff election, which is the second round, essentially, as we said, voters chose between the acting president, Gunba, who was running, and his opponent, Agdur Ardzimba. Gunba secured victory with 55.6% of the vote. What can you tell us about what these elections were about?
Well, first of all, Abkhazia has long history of civil unrest, let's say, which begins in 1980s during the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And Abkhazian ethnos is very compact ethnos on one hand, but at the same time, they are very, politically and socially active, not economically, to be frank. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and Abkhaz-Georgian conflict, there was a new status quo, which is Abkhazia as semi-independent state, let's say, which is half dependent on Russia and partly, unrecognized territory, which is, very limiting factor for international relations. So Abkhaz citizens had problems, and at the same time, despite the fact that Abkhaz have expelled majority of Georgians, basically there were 238,000 Georgians according to 1989 census, okay. And by 2002 census in Abkhazia, only 42,000 or 45,000 maybe have been left there. So we can say that up to 200,000 Georgians were expelled from Abkhazia. Not all of the Georgians, but majority of them. So Abkhazia is still multi-ethnic society. As of now, Abkhazians comprise exactly 50% of the population, while the rest is being spread among Georgians, Armenians, Russians, and some other minorities, including Greeks and and Estonians who have been much more in numbers during Soviet times, but there are still some left. So anyway, Abkhaz society is a complex society. Another problem is a statehood issue, which Abkhazia was not very successful at. So there is a very high crime rate, not very successful economic build-up, and despite the fact that Abkhazians have, built an ethnocracy, as they say, which is purely the whole leadership of Abkhazia is purely represented by ethnic Abkhazians, because Abkhazians are very afraid of losing their country. It's a very small country. Of course, Georgians are disputing, and according to most of the states, Abkhazia is still Georgia. But for Abkhazians, it's a separate country, and they are very afraid of losing this territory. So they are kind of in the situation of defensive situation. They are very afraid of being overwhelmed by immigrants, for example, Russian immigrants. So that's why they are not opening up the property market for foreigners, including Russians. And Russians want to get property market there because, on one hand, they are ready to invest in Abkhazia. On the other hand, they want, Russia is a cold country. Abkhazia is a very warm place. So they would like to have a rest there, let's say. But Abkhazians are afraid that Russians will start immigrating there, and this will shift the ethnic balance. And this became one of the major factors of this contradiction. Another factor was that the decade-long unsuccessful state-building process led to very deeply rooted discontent in the politics. And there is one more dimension. The Russian-Turkish rivalry in Abkhazia, which is basically going on for 200 years in reality. Because by 19th century, let's say half of Abkhazians were Muslim, the rest were either Christian or pagan or non-religious, let's say, and majority of Abkhaz Muslims were uprising against Russians during the time of Russian conquest, and they had to flee Abkhazia, and there were some human losses in the process, so they had left for Turkey. And Turkey was trying to play on the perceptions of the Abkhazians who have been left in Abkhazia and still tries to, somehow play this card. So there is a rivalry between Russia and Turkey, discontent in this current policy, which is by many perceived as pro-Russian policy, by many in Abkhazia. And then there is let's say, latent ethnic conflict. So all of this has brought to this situation. So this led to this contradiction between, let's say, loyalist, pro-Russian loyalist Badr Gunba and the opposition representative, or let's say pro-Turkish Adgur Ardzimba. Okay. And Ardzimba started playing nationalistic card, started playing anti-Russian card, and started playing, in reality, pro-Turkish card. And this has brought up the nationalistic and anti-Armenian sentiment. Why did they use this sentiment? First of all, I'm sure it was incentivized by Turkey, but then also it is very important tool to not let Armenians to participate. Because let's say if ethnic Abkhazian votes were distributed evenly, or maybe even with small margin towards Adgur Ardzimba, then the Armenian votes were primarily towards Gunba. And if Armenians would not participate, then Ardzimba had more chances to win. So they started anti-Armenian campaign, telling Armenians to flee or not to participate in elections, blaming Armenians for, let's say, Russian dominance and so on and so forth. And that is why, now situation is rather heated. But in the end, we see that Gunba has won with 55 or 56%, and Ardzimba has lost with 42%. First of all, 42 is not too little, and then there is still a heated situation.
It's not decisive, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it still might be that ethnic Abkhaz majority could vote for Ardzimba. So this is a very heated situation. And by the way, I can say that Abkhazia was, considering this limited factor of expelled Georgians and its ethnocratic nature, but it's still kind of electoral democracy, in contradiction to many other places of Soviet Caucasus.
Do you
So
know
it's yeah.
which of the parties, whether it's Ardzimba or Gunba, which one would be more favorable towards establishing some kind of détente or peace with Georgia, improving relations with Georgia? Because we know that that's also important for the Armenian community, for the railway. Eventually, we maybe it's a dream, but still, we Armenians dream that the railway can open up. Which one of these candidates would be better for improvement of relationship with Georgia, and as a result, improvement of Russian and Georgian relations?
I think I'm not 100% sure because, first of all, it depends on terms. But I think Gunba, which is, let's say, more towards leaning towards Russia, is more likely to get involved in negotiations with with Georgians, because, first of all, Georgia might get involved in such negotiations with Russians, so it might be kind of triangle. And then Ardzimba, being nationalistic, he has criticized some Georgian steps lately, so it might be he could be, let's say, more against this move. But again, it depends on conditions. Let's see what will happen next, and I think it's not that much dependent on Abkhazia.
Yeah. So I think to summarize, we can say that this round was settled, but the issue remains still sort of very shaky, given the results of the election. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and one more thing. One of your questions was Russia asleep? And I think yes, because in some cases Russians try to affect political processes in some countries, but in most cases they don't get involved. In the contrary to what you can read in some Western media, that here and there Russians are getting involved. In reality, yes, the West is getting involved in every political process elsewhere, but Russians in most cases are abstaining, and they are waiting for the results, and they are trying to work with new leadership, trying to deal with new leadership with conventional methods, because they are not very successful in the so-called soft power, but they are much more prone towards classical diplomacy and the hard power. So they are trying to get the partner and then to deal with it with them. But now the problem was that there was clearly anti-Russian candidate, and they got involved in the end. They started campaigning for Gunba, and at some point they started pushing those who were spreading anti-Armenian sentiment with Russian laws, and started, they said Abkhazian citizens are in most cases Russian citizens as well. So let's say they said, we have long hands and we will push anyone who is spreading anti-Armenian sentiment. Of course, this is just a statement, but they started some judicial processes. So they were limiting this anti-Armenian propaganda as well. So basically, it was, I can say that we can call this a Russian-Turkish proxy conflict in this Abkhazian election. It's just my assessment. I might be wrong, but that's what I see here.
All right. Well, we're trying to keep a more watchful eye on Abkhazian issues. So we'll try to let our listeners know if there's anything new. Coming to Yerevan, the main issue this week was the continuing obvious failure of negotiations between Pashinyan and Aliyev, if you can call that negotiations, and also the situation of Armenian hostages and POWs in Baku. Azerbaijan is conducting what are widely considered as staged trials against Armenian POWs and former leaders of Artsakh, with reports of torture and deteriorating health conditions. Ruben Vartanyan, a prominent Armenian figure, is on strike. He went on hunger strike, and this drew international concern. Images showing Bako Sahakian missing his front teeth, and Ruben Vartanyan with what appear to be bruises on his face are cited as evidence of torture and beating. Meanwhile, until recently, the Armenian government was largely silent on the POWs, saying that if they spoke up, they would actually damage their situation more. They seem to have changed their stance, however, this week, strangely coinciding with internal protests on the issue. Pashinyan is now vocally accusing Azerbaijan of torturing the POWs and hostages. Why is the Armenian government shifting its tactics now, despite it saying that actually if you speak up, then you will hurt the situation of the POWs?
Well, first of all, Alain Simonian, right today, he said again the same. He said, let's speak less about POWs. And this, in his view, will help. Well, technically, it could work as such if that would not be the Karabakh trial, the big Karabakh trial, which Azerbaijan is staging, and also if Armenian government was doing everything possible, both on judicial and diplomatic level. It's obvious they are not. It's obvious they are not. I'm excluding any possibility they are involved in this process to the sufficient level. Because what can we hear from them on the political level? That's completely different mindset, approach, and what can we hear in the propaganda? Day and night, they are running a campaign against those Artsakhi leaders who are being tortured in Azerbaijan. They are running a supportive propaganda, supportive of Azerbaijani criminal regime. So in reality, they want the hostages to be held there. That's obvious. That's obvious. And by the way, the former Prime Minister of Artsakh, or State Minister to be correct, Hrant Mikaelian, has also stated this, that Yerevan and Baku share responsibility for this act. And I think this is very clear and exact statement about these events. Why it is so? Because in reality, if we look that who is winning from this process, let's put aside for one moment Baku Sahakian, who was a long-time leader of Artsakh, for example. But for example, Ruben Vartanyan, who was state minister for just 3 months, he had no time to change anything there.
But Ruben Vartanyan is basically being used as the PR-wise, is being used both by Aliyev and Pashinyan.
Yeah, so, but what can Ruben Vartanyan contribute to this anti-Artsakhi trial? Basically nothing. But what he can change in Yerevan, this is the $1 million question. He could contribute to power change in Yerevan very clearly. He might not win, as Bagrat Sarkazan did not win last year, but he was close to making a big trouble for Pashinyan. And Ruben Vartanyan is able to make even bigger trouble for Pashinyan. If he comes back to Yerevan, and by the way, it was the same back in 2023, when they did not let him to enter Armenia. If he comes back to Yerevan, in the moment he is becoming a national hero, the leader of unification of any anti-Pashinyan forces. That's obvious. So it's a joint thing. And given that Pashinyan was leading anti-Ruben Vartanyan campaign, both on international and domestic level, it's clear for me that they had a negotiation track, informal, when they have agreed that they want these hostages to stay there. Because Pashinyan was very afraid of Artsakhi Armenians coming back to Yerevan and contributing to power change in the streets. Now, Artsakh politically is beheaded with this. And this is how he saved himself. I think this is very important. So, in my view, Pashinyan has a lot of things to do to this so-called court. But at the same time, it's not that he can do much to bring them back home. Because he can legitimize Aliyev's actions. But he cannot harm Aliyev very much. That's my opinion. But again, he has clear responsibility to do everything possible to bring them back home. And this staged process, I think, not only it is shameful and it is collapsing itself, because they are torturing Armenian leaders, they are torturing Armenians, but they are not getting anything. And on the contrary, Baku Sahakian said that Artsakhi struggle for independence, it was not a criminal case as Azerbaijan is pretending it to be, but it is a political case and it is a political fight. So he's even despite the torture, the beating, and so on, he's voicing up Armenians much louder than Pashinyan is doing it in Yerevan.
Yes, and In fact, if Pashinyan really, followed his own advice of staying silent, maybe things would have been a little bit better for Ruben Vartanyan. If you remember, it was a few months ago when Pashinyan basically said that we should still sort of, determine how it ended up that Ruben Vartanyan renounced his Russian citizenship, entered Armenia, and went to Artsakh. And essentially, he was hinting that Ruben Vartanyan was sent to Artsakh by Russia, and
Putin.
as a
Yeah, by
response to
Putin.
this, as a response to this, apparently the prosecutor in Azerbaijan actually initiated more criminal charges against Ruben Vartanyan based on Pashinyan's own statements. So, very strange way of saying one thing, doing something else, and then having in fact, instead of improving the chances of Armenians coming back, Armenian leaders coming back, he's making things worse even, apparently.
Well, I want to make a small comment to what you just said. First of all, when Pashinyan questions how Ruben Vartanyan came to Artsakh, he is against spreading the conspiracy mindset, which he loves to do. So he plays on, no one knows how he came, obviously,
Right.
because he came himself. It's not that 3 million people were traveling with him. And, you raise the question, you create a new discussion out of nothing, and then the person has to justify himself already. But of course, Ruben Vartanyan cannot do this because he's in Azerbaijan jail. So now the image is broken and so on. So this is a conspiracy mindset, the the creating a bad image out of nothing. That's a very Pashinyan is very profound in doing this towards different people.
So in the end, what is the right strategy to help the POWs and hostages? It seems like unless there are some military, negotiations, like, exchange of hostages between, if for instance we captured several generals, what in reality can Armenia do? I assume it would have to be some kind of international pressure, but what are your thoughts around this?
Well, first of all, I think there are better specialists than me who can comment this. But what I can say is that you need to use all possible diplomatic, judicial methods, push on the levels of all international courts. By the way, Armenia has joined Rome Statute, but is not using it. So we're saying that it's not against Putin, it's against Baku. But what we have seen so far, it was just against Putin. But going back to this, so we need to use all these stages to open up this question. Then we need to use international media. So we need a proper media campaign. Then we need negotiations with foreign countries. And first of all, Russia, EU, US, and other major players to push Azerbaijan, and Iran maybe, to push Azerbaijan to release these people. And then, yes, so the method of getting some Azerbaijani hostages, not necessarily generals, maybe some soldiers. By the way, Pashinyan has gave up some Azerbaijani criminals who came to Armenia, killed some people, and then he just released them without any exchange. So they could be exchanged. Now, yeah, you can get some soldiers on the border and try to exchange. It might not work. That's why I'm saying I'm not the best expert in this field. You need negotiation experts and so on and so forth. But you need to use whole toolkit in order to force Azerbaijan to come back to the constructive way. Now Azerbaijan feels that they can do whatever they want, however they want, and to make any crime. But what is good here is that despite the silence of Armenian government, despite the counteraction in reality, there have been many statements of Armenians worldwide and also some international organizations, rather bold statements. So this is somehow changing the situation, but I'm far from thinking that this push is enough. But I think this is some of the some starting. But Armenia could use diplomatic, political, media, and other tools to make a significant change there.
Okay, so before we move on, we just wanted to update you on the developments internally in Baku. We know that the situation between Russia and Azerbaijan is not very good, and that seems to be still sort of boiling in the background. We know that Aliyev has canceled licenses, I believe, for Sputnik, which is the Russian state broadcaster, but also BBC, interestingly. And last week we Kaliber.az, which is an Azerbaijani press. We don't normally like to think they're fully reliable, but they're related to the Azerbaijani government. They reported that Azerbaijan has asked the UN Development Program, the UN Refugee Agency (UNHCR), and the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is the only essentially outside agency that Armenians can rely on for ensuring the safety of Armenian prisoners. So they've asked also the ICRC to leave the country. We haven't gotten confirmation of this yet, but Hrant, what do you make of this? I mean, besides obviously, maybe Aliyev is trying to capitalize on this anti-international agency attitude that is popular in the Trump White House, but is there something else besides this? Because we know that, for instance, the banning of the media, people are speculating it might be related to potentially new military activity that they're planning. Do you think that you can make any conclusion from all of this related to Azerbaijan's intentions of starting a new war soon?
Well, actually, Aliyev is trying to control all the media in Azerbaijan, and he controls every Azerbaijani media there. And there are some international media which are trying to, let's say, stay in line with Azerbaijani propaganda, but still are not completely dependent on Azerbaijani regime. So either Sputnik or Radio Freedom or some
Oh,
other.
okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Radio Freedom or some other editorials there were trying to, not detach themselves completely from Azerbaijani state official line, and they were trying not to, make us Aliyev angry, let's say, but that was not enough. Aliyev, in any case, he knows that those are independent from him, and he wanted to limit this. I don't think there is anything else. So he might make a decision to attack Armenia at every time or to start a new war, but it's not that they will not let him to do so. I think if he needs, he can push them to limit spread of any kind of information. He just uses this as an excuse, since there is an anti-USAID campaign in the United States, and he is closing every activity connected to USAID, and then some international or Western medias there. But at the same time, he says, okay, if I'm closing Western media here, I can close Russian media and Russian state-run organizations as well, USAID-like organizations. So he does all of that simultaneously, completely eradicating any foreign influence from Russia or the West on Azerbaijan internally. So that's what his goal is. I don't see anything else here.
And meanwhile, coming back to Yerevan, there were protests this week from civil society and opposition figures who are pressuring the government to take stronger action regarding Armenian hostages in Baku. On top of that, even international organizations have called for an independent medical examination of the prisoners, which I'm pretty sure will fall on deaf ears. But specifically related to the protests in Yerevan, how significant do you think are these protests in terms of public sentiment? Can they grow to be a rallying point for a wider portion of the Armenian populace than it is right now?
Well, first of all, we have seen very wide coverage of the situation with POWs in the opposition media, not
Right.
so much in state-run media and in pro-government media, but the opposition media was covering it to a very big extent. So I think at least significant portion of the population is aware. And by the way, very many are angry. According to the previous polls, majority sees Pashinyan as somehow or significantly being guilty for what is happening there. or at least responsible. So I think there is a very significant anger towards this situation in Yerevan and in the whole Armenia. But I don't see yet how it converts into the political landscape, because there is yet no party rallying there. They're just individuals. And, to have a successful campaign, you need leaders, you need political agenda, not only negative agenda, but also a positive agenda. For example,
Right.
let's freeze these hostages and bring them to power. That would completely change the narrative. And the humanitarian agenda, well, that does not work that much on the political level. So as of now, we just see sporadic, anger strikes, but nothing else. And by the way, majority of those who are protesting have been connected to some of the Ruben Vartanyan organizations. Not only him, of course, but I think the protests yet are smaller than they should have been. Also, given the fact that there are many people who are relatives to the hostages, or who are somehow connected to our friends and so on. Not, I mean, even personal connections are not being used to the enough extent. So I think yet these actions are too small, but they show some potential of growing.
Hmm.
We need more political actors getting involved. But I think what government is feeling here is that they need to somehow react. That's why we have seen some comments this week. We should not buy this as government dealing with this issue. They are just trying to react to the public narrative which they have not created. Most of the narratives, most of the discussions which occurred in Armenia in the last 7 years were initiated by this government, and this
Right.
is one of the very few cases which was not initiated by this government.
Interesting. Okay, so in late January, Pashinyan had said that they had made an offer on unblocking the railway communications in the region that Azerbaijan can't refuse. I don't know if I'm giving that exact quote, but he said, we have made an offer that Azerbaijan can't refuse. Well, in fact, Azerbaijan has rejected this offer a few weeks later. And Pashinyan keeps claiming that the fact that there are continuing proposals going back and forth show that the negotiations are not at an impasse. But to any observer, it's clear that, using Microsoft Word with track changes on being emailed back and forth is no indication of advancing negotiations. In fact, maybe the opposite. In fact, just today, Pashinyan again said that, we have offered Azerbaijan the same conditions as Iran has given for Azerbaijan to travel through Armenia. And apparently, Azerbaijan and Aliyev are rejecting this offer. What is it that Azerbaijan wants specifically related to this unblocking of communications? And then also, what other points are there that are known to us, that are demands that Azerbaijan has that Pashinyan hasn't met yet?
Well, I think I have talked about this issue several times, and my opinion has not changed. I will try to sum up it
Yeah, very
as short as possible.
shortly.
So first, the main initiator of this policy is not Azerbaijan, it's Turkey, and its Turkish agenda, so-called Zangezur corridor, and that is why it's not very successful strategy to have negotiating track with Azerbaijan, but not involving Turkey there. And also, Armenia has not sufficient bargaining power to deal with Turkey here. So unless there is any major foreign power who gets invested into this process, which is trying to block Turkey or to counteract Turkey, there will be no success. That's first. Second, Azerbaijani and Turkish goal is clearly to eradicate, to destroy the Armenian statehood, not less. So this is why any negotiation will fail. Can we remember any successful negotiation in the last 30 years? Only once, the ceasefire of 1994, when Azerbaijan was exhausted, and 1 year after, or even less, half a year after, Turkey was warned of nuclear strike by Russians. I mean, direct nuclear strike by Russians, to not get involved into the Karabakh war. It was in October 1993. That's the only case when we had successful negotiation with Azerbaijan. The rest have failed. There were cases when Armenia and Azerbaijan came very, very close to an agreement, and then suddenly it fails. And it was all because of Turkish position. Unfortunately, very few people talk about this. They still think it's, Armenia and Azerbaijan should deal that. That's bullshit. Now, Zangezur corridor issue. The way Azerbaijan puts this issue officially is that Azerbaijan should have a Nochek pass through Armenia. So basically, it's a non-Armenian territory. So basically, they want to get the territory from Armenia, to put their forces, military forces there, and use it.
Yeah.
So they want. Why do you need this passage? Why do you need this passage unchecked by Armenia? If it's only economic, if it's only human contacts between, let's say, Nakhichevan and Baku, or Turkey and Azerbaijan, why do you need this special regime? Obviously, it is for military supplies towards Baku and even towards Central Asia. So the goal is big, entering Central Asia and playing a big game there.
So that would mean
Armenia,
that would mean that the targets of that unchecked supply of weapons are Russia and Iran, right? So
China.
And China. Okay. My question is, can't they supply weapons and material and terrorists to Central Asia by air or by any other way besides just through Armenia?
The ground supply is completely different story, or even sea supply through Caspian Sea. Now, we are seeing how Turkey is trying to reform Turkey Council from just council towards a military organization, and a rather effective one. The day Turkey can supply Central Asian countries with weapons will mark the beginning of a very bold competition between Russia and Turkey in the Central Asia. And as of now, Russia has no competition there. It's a very big difference. So it's a difference of geopolitical scale. Now, there are another roads of economic and other connections between Turkey and Azerbaijan. Those are through Georgia and Iran. Now, Georgian road is very, profound one, including many including railroads, some pipelines, including ground roads and so on. Iran also has offered its so-called corridor, but it's just a road, checked road, not unchecked. And so Azerbaijan is using it. And by the way, they have always used it to get in touch with Nakhichevan. So basically, they have the ground roads, but this does not imply they have unchecked weapon supply. I think that there is an obvious difference. It's not about money. It's not about paying Armenia or not. It's about, first of all, Armenian sovereignty, because sovereign Armenia will never be pro-Turkish. Yes, you can try to use non-sovereign, let's say, puppet state, which Armenia has become under Pashinyan rule. But, this is not a long-term game. At some point, Pashinyan will be changed, and the next leader will question all this, and this is pretty obvious. So that's one thing. And another thing is that basically they want weapon supply which does not imply any checking. And that will change the geopolitics of Central Asia completely. Now, Armenian sovereignty factor in the South Caucasus is changing the whole landscape for Turkey. On one hand, if there is a sovereign Armenia, and of course, Artsakh factor was very important in this term, that's one story. If there is an absence of Armenia, that's a completely different story. Because imagine you are constructing an empire, which is right in the middle of it, there is an anti-empire.
Yes.
So you cannot work with this.
Yeah, Armenia is essentially Armenia is the wedge. Tansu Çiller said the damn wedge. So yeah. Sorry for interrupting, but you were saying other reasons. Maybe we can come back to the track I derailed you from.
Yeah. So basically, Azerbaijan will not accept this deal because it's not in their interests. Basically, you cannot resolve the issues which Azerbaijan has, or which Turkey has put in front of Azerbaijan with these peace talks. Because I remember very clearly how Pashinyan was in 2021. He was saying that, okay, I'm ready to sign a peace deal at any moment. I'm ready. I want it. I will make any concession. And by the way, he has done so many concessions you cannot even list it, and including by the way, giving up Artsakh completely.
Right.
And how did this negotiation succeed? In no way. So I think it's not realistic to expect this negotiation to succeed. In reality, these negotiations will fail the very same way they failed beforehand. For example, we can remember September 2024 when Blinken was trying to organize a negotiation during the UN General Assembly session in September 2024, and those negotiations clearly failed. Armenian media did not tell much about this, especially state-run media, but that was a big fail. But I think these negotiations are doomed to fail because there is no common ground.
Okay, let's come to the last topic of our discussion today, which is the infighting in the Armenian opposition. Ever since the 2023 Yerevan municipal elections, there has been increased infighting among representatives of various factions of Armenian opposition. Some would say it even existed before, but it was all low grade. Anyway, so this low-grade warfare between the supporters of Robert Kocharian and Serge Sarkisyan was so far happening at the unofficial level. But ever since the press conference by Robert Kocharian last week, the fighting has escalated. During the press conference, Kocharian was asked why the opposition is not planning on joining forces for the upcoming 2026 elections. Kocharian said that some of his supporters will never accept joining forces with Republicans, so it doesn't make sense. I mean, from one perspective, I can understand that, but if we go back to the 2021 elections, we know that the Republicans were also claiming that we should not even legitimize the elections by participating in them. And I believe some of those arguments still exist today. So it seems like Robert Kocharian has taken the lead in declaring that he will participate in the 2026 elections, and this has set off this fighting. So this mutual accusations escalated to the point where even Armen Ashotyan, the vice president of the Republican Party, made a statement, and Hrant Mikaelian, head of Robert Kocharian's office, also got involved. It's not pretty. It's not, I would think that the opposition has better things to do than fighting with each other, but that is the situation we have today. So, as an analyst, as someone who's following the situation, what can you tell us? What is driving the latest divisions in the opposition?
In reality, it's a long-term story, coming at least from 2013 or maybe 2012, when Serge Sarkisyan has done everything possible to not let Robert Kocharian to have a comeback into Armenian politics, and Kocharian was very upset and has made a couple of interviews, including a very famous back then interview on Radio Free Europe, Azatutun, that the constitutional change, which took place in 2015 to 2018, was in some portion made to exclude his comeback to the politics. And since then, when the so-called revolution in 2018 took place in Yerevan, there was a heated discussion between Kocharian and Serge Sarkisyan supporters about who is responsible for that, and many Kocharian supporters were blaming Serge Sarkisyan for giving power to Pashinyan. And by the way, Serge Sarkisyan supporters were also blaming Kocharian or Kocharian supporters or Kocharian-related people of participating in pro-Pashinyan protest.
Yes.
And to some extent, both are right. So the problem here is that, unfortunately, these leaders, especially Robert Kocharian, are not able to leave the past to the past, and that's why they still, are kind of engaged in this discussion about 2018 or some other stuff. And by the way, I've heard from some people back in 2018, some people from Dashnak party, from Sargsyan party and from Kochyan party, that it's better to give power to Kochyan or to Pashinyan than to, and you can name, for example, to Karen Karapetyan, or to leave it with Sargsyan and so on. So in some cases, we see they hate each other more than they hate Nikol Pashinyan. So basically, it's an opposition triangle, not even triangle, because there are some other parties who also hate both Pashinyan and Kochyan and Sargsyan and hate each other. So basically, it's kind of an issue with the political culture of Armenia. I would not speak so much about Armen Ashotyan or Hrant Mikaelian, although I would say that it's not so much about Kochyan and Sargsyan. In reality, there are some low-grade propagandists on the side of these leaders, especially on the side of Kochyan, some, a couple of Russian-speaking women of old age who are spreading hate towards Sargsyan day and night. And the issue is that the topics they're discussing does not matter today. It's purely irrelevant. This is what is important. I think it's a big issue that many people in Armenian politics are engaged in irrelevant discussion. The relevant discussion would be, how can we deal with this geopolitical situation of Armenia? How can we deal with long-term economic development? How can we deal with social relations in Armenia, but not who was right and who was wrong in 2018, 2013, 2008, by the way. This is also being discussed, 2003 and so on. And even in 1994 or 1998, as, for example, Levon Terpetrosyan is still speaking about that. I think those discussions are purely irrelevant. And this is problem with Armenian political culture, which is very leader-centric and much less so program-centric. I think until we get shift towards that, we will be dragged into these low-grade discussions.
In the interest of time, I think we should close our discussion today. We had a lot of other questions, but so I'd just like to announce one more thing. This week was the 37th anniversary of the pogroms in Sumgait, which started this entire conflict, I would say, which accentuated to the point where it became an ethnic conflict. Hundreds of Armenians were murdered and attacked, and this eventually led to the ethnic cleansing of the entire Armenian population of Azerbaijan, with the icing on the cake being the 2023 ethnic cleansing of independent Artsakh, hitherto independent Artsakh. I think that this is a good opportunity to meditate on this fact and to understand the true causes of this conflict, and if anything, hatred of Armenians, hatred of anything resembling Armenians, even non-Armenians with the IAN last name, has only increased by astronomical proportions. I'll let you then sort of decide whether it's possible, whether peace is close anytime soon. Yeah, think about what it means, 37 years Sumgait anniversary. Okay, well, thank you, Hrant. Thank you for our discussion today, and talk to you soon.
Okay.
That was our weekend review show, recorded on Tuesday, March 4, 2025. We've been talking with Hrant Mikaelian, who is a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. Hrant is co-founder of the Armenian Project and is a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. For more information on the participants in this episode, check out our show notes at podcasts.grung.org/episode number. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and please find us on social media and follow us wherever you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.